If you've been thinking about using gouache paint to make art, then stick around because I'm going to share all the tips that I've learned from using this medium so far. Hey creatives, welcome back. I'm Michelle, and today I thought I would do a quick little tips video on using gouache paint. So as you may know or you may not know, that I've been on an art journey since the last few months of getting back into art, and gouache is one of the mediums that I have been using and experimenting with, and I really love using this paint. It's a really fun paint to use and you can do a lot of stuff with it, so I thought that I would share some basic tips that if you are thinking about using gouache, maybe some of these tips might help you before you get started so you can really understand what it's like to use this medium and what to expect, and maybe some of the pros and cons about using gouache. So if you don't know what gouache is, it's a really interesting paint. It's been around for a long time, but it was mostly used by like illustrators and in advertising because you could get a really nice opaque matte finish from this paint. And a lot of people also tried to use it as a watercolor, and it's kind of like a watercolor because you can wet it down and you can make washes out of it. But where it really shines and what it's meant to be used for is more of an opaque medium, so that you can create solid color layers, and you can use light over dark, but you can get a really nice matte finish and some solid painted areas from it. It's just a really fun medium to use and very versatile, and it's just a lot of fun. So I've enjoyed using it. I plan to use it a lot more, and I hope that it's something that you're going to try as well. So stick around, and I'm just going to give you a couple of my tips that I've learned, and I hope it helps you out too. All right, let's go. All right, cool. So I just wanted to go over everything I have learned with gouache thus far in the last few months. So here's a couple illustrations that I did using gouache, just so you can see what the consistency looks like when you are using gouache. So you can see the really nice, like solid matte finish of it that you can get, really like fill in like big areas with a nice solid color. Which is really nice, and then just the layering effect. So that's one that I did, was just a really simplistic, trying to like more color blocking, less detail kind of image that was using gouache. This was one of my favorites. This one I did use a lot more detail in, but this is all done with gouache. And then a little bit of Fineliner just in the details throughout, just for definition. That's just a style that I personally love to do. You might not want to do black liner. You might just want to do pure gouache color only. But that's, you know, that's your artistic choice to do. But there's lots of options with gouache. So I just wanted to show you a couple ways that I have used it in the past. And you can see that it's nice for layering the colors over top of each other. So I really like that. And then this was just another one. This was when I was just trying out the new gouache, so you could just see how the nice, how it lays down. And then with the, I think I used the Signa, I used this one over top, the Signa Uniball over top for the white. So it's nice because you can layer it. And then this was just another one I had done from a book. You might have seen the previous video on how I learned to use gouache. And this was just one of the tutorials from the book that I had used. So you can see the nice brightness of the colors. This one's a little more dry brushing down here. So it just depends how much water you put with it. But this is kind of what you can do with gouache. Obviously there's a ton more. I'm just getting started with it, but I love this medium and I plan to do a lot more illustrations with it. So I'll just show you the gouaches that I've been using and the kinds of gouaches that there are. This was the gouache I started out with, and it's just the HIMI jelly gouache is what they refer to it as, because it comes already in a wet consistency. So obviously mine's been dried up. When you do open them, they do tend to dry out, And one thing you can do when you're using the jelly gouache is you can open your palette and you can just take your spray bottle and spray the whole thing, let it sit. It will kind of reconstitute everything. Some people like to go in occasionally and actually like with a toothpick or a skewer or something and reconstitute the entire thing to make it wet. I just tend to use it. I spray my palette. If I'm using these ones, I'll just use the water bottle, give everything a good soak. And then as I need it, I'll just add more water to it and use the colors that I need, just adding more water and the consistency I need. And a lot of times I will take like a big scoop of it and then put it on my palette and use it for my palette, because I don't really want to get my colors dirty. I know, especially using like the white and black, it's really easy to, you put a dirty brush in there and then it kind of wrecks it. So I try to use, I actually have one brush on hand that I'll use to like kind of scoop out, say, white and put it on palette, and I'll use that as it, the only thing I use it for is to kind of scoop out white or another color. So I'm not just washing my actual brush that I'm using all the time. But that is the jelly gouache that you can use. They're fun to use. They're not bad. They're not terrible, but they're not like, I don't love them as much just because of they're dried up. I did just buy a new set of, these are not like high-end professional ones. These are ones I got off Amazon. They are Castle Arts. I don't know if I can put links in my descriptions yet. If I can, I will put the links, but otherwise you can look up on Amazon. It's Castle Arts, and it's just like probably more student grade, but this is the first palette, this is the first set of like tube gouache that I've purchased. So that's what I'm going to be using today to kind of show you some tips that I've learned. So I mean, I can't really compare it to the really expensive professional ones because I haven't used those ones yet. I've only used these, but as far as gouache and tubes go, I'm enjoying using it from wet out of the tube, as opposed to reconstituting the jelly gouache and dry gouache on my palette. You can do both, but I guess comes down to a personal preference. But this is what I have purchased, and I've just started using them. So again, there's lots of different kinds out there that you can get, but these are the ones that I'm starting with. And then down the road, as I experiment maybe with other brands, then I'll give you my 2 cents worth on them. But those are the gouaches so far that I have been using. So let's get into trying some out. Okay, this was the color tester for all the colors that I did get in that gouache set. You could see I did it straight out of the tube and then with adding water just to see what the different consistencies I can get with gouache. So gouache is meant to be, well, you can use it in several ways. You can water it down like a watercolor, and then the less water you add, the more opaque and creamy it gets. And then that's when I think the joy of gouache really comes in, is when you use it more opaque and you can layer it. Let's get our stuff ready here. These were the brushes that came with the HIMI Gouache. So you do get like more of a watercolor type. You get a square and you get a filbert, which are great to start. I do use these occasionally, but I tend to use more of an assortment like this. So if you're using it more watered down, you can use the more watercolor type brushes. If you're getting more of a, maybe you're doing a thinner layer across a large area, you can use the watercolor brush because it does hold a little more paint. But if you are doing more maybe like sharp lines and smaller details with solid colors, you might find you like using a square brush more because you can get those straight lines with them. And then of course this one's a little more tapered, but you can also use the filberts. That was another watercolor brush that I tend to use. And then the little detail brushes are really good for your, you know, your top layers with the details, so you can get the nice fine lines and details in those. But those are the brushes that I tend to use. I think a lot of people tend to use like to do smaller maybe illustrations with gouache. You're not doing like huge canvases like you would with acrylic paints, so you're not really going to need the huge brushes like you would with acrylic or maybe watercolor, because you might use it, maybe you're doing a bigger background with more of a watered down wash, you might use a bigger brush. But in general, you're probably doing things that are a little more detail oriented, I find. But anyways, it's all, again, your choice. You have to try, play around with the brushes and see what's going to work for you and the style that you like to paint. So I thought we would start by maybe doing, I'll show you consistency. Start with a couple colors here. I'm just going to start with a pink. I'm going to add a bit of water to it so you can see here. This is just adding a bit of water, so it is more of a watercolor consistency, more of a wash. As I add more paint to that and get it a little bit thicker, you can see that the color in it are just so vibrant. I love them, and it still looks a little more like a watercolor. But as you add more paint and it gets thicker, then you can start to see where the beauty of the gouache comes in. Because just with watercolor, you're not necessarily going to get these vibrant colors. And then if I was to just use it, say straight paint, no water, you're also going to see, that's probably not enough paint, but I'll show you the consistency of just a straight up paint. It's a little transparent, but you can layer these. You can see the difference in that compared to that. That's all from just the same dollop of paint. So you can see where the use of gouache comes in, where you can use it in so many different ways, whether you want to use it more of an opaque setting to cover a whole area, or you want to water it down maybe to like fill in a whole background or something. This is great. And then it's with these opaque colors, with the consistency, where the joy of the layering comes in. And where I find is that you should start with thin first, do your thin layers first, and then get thicker as you go. So it's a thick over thin works the best, because gouache does activate if you add water. So if you have some color that has been dried already and then you add water to it, like if you see, so now I'm adding more water to this thick layer, you can see how it's reactivated and just become like a thinner watercolor again. So you have to be careful when you're doing your layers, is that you want to let these layers dry first before you add subsequent layers on top, because you will reactivate it. So I'm going to do a couple squares here of a couple colors just so you can see how the colors look. We're going to let some of them dry so that we could paint more over top. So here's a really nice green that I'm going to just do a little square of. We're going to let it dry a bit. There's a hair on that. This is straight from the tube color, so I want to get a really nice solid opaque square. And we're going to show, I'll do a little bit watered down too, and then we can see the difference in when we add other colors on top. I love this color. So this one's a little more watered down than this one is. Then we're going to give that a little bit of a dry. And then I want to show you, what happens. So the thing with the gouache that's funny, and you'll have to get used to when you're planning your art, is that the lighter colors will tend to dry darker, and the darker colors will tend to dry lighter. So I'm actually going to get maybe some black and some lighter colors, and I'll put some of that down, and then we can see how that looks after it's dried. So let me do that. So I am doing a little square of terracotta here, and we're gonna see how that will dry as it goes. You're gonna see that it's gonna dry a bit darker, and then I got some. What do I have here? Some burnt umber. And you can see how this will dry a bit lighter. So near the end of the video, we can go back and compare it with some fresh paint, and you can see the difference in it. Okay. Now the other thing I wanted to show you is that to lighten a color, like in watercolor, you would just add more water to it. But with the gouache, the best way to lighten a color, like if you lighten it, you're gonna get just watery paint. But if you want to lighten it, the best way to do that is with white. So here I'm gonna take a big chunk of white, and you can see it makes a nice pretty pink. And then anytime you add white to it also, you'll find that it does become more opaque, because the white is a very opaque pigment. And you can see compared to the dark one here, we'll add this nice, and you can see how nice and creamy that is. And this is another one we can compare. When it dries, it'll go a bit darker, but you can see how nice this pink mixed with white looks compared to the pink mixed with water. They both are lighter, but this one is going to be opaque and that one is going to be more watered down like a watercolor. So in general, when you want to lighten a color, you're going to want to add white gouache, which is why you're always going to go through more white gouache than any other color, because you're probably going to use a lot to lighten up your colors. So you always probably want to have an extra tube of that, or a bigger tube of that. If you are buying just a few colors, you'll find you probably will run out of that one first if you buy it in a set and there's only one. So you can see how, even if I put a little bit over there, you can see how it's already lighter than where I just put it down. I don't know if you can, I don't know if this is going to catch in the picture, but we're going to see how these are drying. You can see in this terracotta color already where the difference is in the drying. This one's actually drying darker. Maybe it's not a good example, but something like this with the pink, it is drying already. So if I'm putting more pink on top of it, you can see the difference from fresh paint to it drying darker. The brown might take a little while, but in general, maybe all paints with different pigments are going to dry a little bit differently, but in general, you're going to see that when you have really light colors, they will dry darker, and when you have dark colors, they're going to dry a bit lighter. So just keep that in mind. All right, so you can see the consistencies. You can see how it dries lighter and darker. I wanted to get this to dry a bit so that we can show how it works to put one color over another. I think I'm just going to use this watercolor brush, and I'm going to take this beautiful teal color, add a bit of water, but not a lot, just to make it a little creamier and easier to work with. But you don't want to add too much water. We can see like over this pink how it looks to add, oops, there's extra water, how it looks to add another layer over top. I don't know if you'll actually see that over the green as much. You can. So that's nice that you can add the layers over top. What you don't want to do is work it in and start rubbing it, because what you'll see is that it's just going to reactivate. And now you can see, like, if I'm going to go over it more than a few times, it's just going to mix the colors together. So let me show you that on maybe the lighter one. If I was to do this over the pink and kind of go back and forth, it's starting to turn it purple because it's reactivating the paint that's underneath. So if you are going to layer colors over top, you want to just kind of do it like a one and done approach. So you have to be like very confident in your brush strokes. So let's actually take a bit of white here and do some white. This is one of the best things about gouache is that you can go with white paint over top of any of your dried colors if you want to add details or lighter color. As you know, with watercolor, if you want something white, you have to paint around it and leave it white, leave the paper showing through, because you can't layer white over dark colors with watercolor. So this is one of the reasons why gouache becomes such a great material to work with, because you can layer over top. So but sometimes if you make a mistake and you try to go over it more than one time, then you'll see that like I said, it does start to reactivate the color. So if you're going to be using white over top, you want to just kind of do it and like leave I did that too many times, but just kind of do one line and leave it. Because if I was to go over this again, I'm just going to lift up the paint. Like so, if I was to come back and try to say I wanted to try to darken it, just see it's just lifting up that paint inside. So you just want to like lay it down and leave it. So just lay it down and leave it. I went over that twice, and that's when you get the best results for adding white over top of another color. You could wait till it's dry again if you did want to enhance. Like sometimes the white over top, maybe it's just the color or the brand that I have, maybe it's not as pigmented as maybe some of the professional stuff, but you can see how this white over the pink, it kind of has a kind of a dull grayish look to it. So what I would probably try to do is let it completely dry and then maybe go back over it with like another layer where I'm just leaving one more layer on top, and that might lighten it. Or I might want to go back again over top with my acrylic pen if I really want to define the white layers on top. I think it depends also what color you're putting it over. You can see on the green, it really stands out. But this one that I put on the pink kind of seemed a bit dull. Let me see if I can do a better. See, that's better. I think I just have enough paint on my brush. But that white really stands up. So that's good. So I just wanted to show you how, again, not to scrub when you're doing your second, third layers. You just want to lay it down once and leave it, because otherwise you're reactivating it. So we don't want that to happen. But it's just great the way that you can layer the colors over top. It's just a really fun medium to use. I really enjoy using it. It's just getting familiar with the way the materials work and understanding how things are going to dry, and understanding how things work with water and reactivation, and keeping that in mind. So kind of planning out your art as you go along. And maybe I find a good way to do it is if you want to start with, say, if you're doing maybe you're doing a landscape or something, or a picture with maybe, I don't know, maybe you're doing some figures sitting at a table or something, but there's a whole big background. So maybe what you want to do is do a nice watery layer for your background to fill in large spaces, and do that first, because then you can come in with your more opaque layers over top and get those nice clean edges. I know my problem with watercolor sometimes is I feel like I have to paint around a subject. Then you kind of get the weird lines around the subject where the watercolor ends, because you don't want to overlap or, you know, mix in or muddy your colors if it touches. So that's why I really like being able to use the more thicker opaque layers of gouache over top of my watery layers, because you can get nice clean lines where I can paint the subject over top of this background, and you don't have to worry about you know, trying to fill it in all the way around the edge and having clean lines. So it's just a really great medium to work with. So I love using it. I'm going to use it a lot more down the road. I don't know if my explanations are very good, but these are just the tips that I have learned so far just in using gouache for a couple months that I think are good to know before you start, because I think a lot of people will come in and try to use it just like maybe a watercolor or maybe just like an acrylic, because it is kind of in the middle, like between the two. And there are pros and cons to using it both ways. So you just have to use it in a way that works for you, like play around with it and see how it works with your style of painting and illustrating. And yeah, you can use it from light to opaque. I want to go back and show you now how these colors look now that the base layer has dried. So let's go in with the terracotta light. And I'm just gonna do another stripe of it over top so you can see. This one didn't really change much. Well, it did. You can see that that is darker than this. I guess you can. I don't know if the camera's picking this up or not, but, or maybe that's not the best color to use because I feel like this does have some dark pigment in it, but we might be able to see it more in this pink. But let's try the brown. Try the burnt umber. And this one actually looks darker. But it's the difference between when it's wet, it's very shiny, and then when it dries, you can see it dries with this really nice matte finish, which is one of the benefits of the gouache paint, or one of the highlights of it, I guess, is it does have this nice matte finish when it's dry. So a lot of the times what you'll have to do, I guess, is whatever gouache you're using, you're going to want to swatch out the colors ahead of time so that you can really get a good idea, like I did with this one. Most of the paints you get, you'll get a tester sheet, so I would highly suggest using it and testing out all your colors so that you're gonna see what your paint looks like once it's dry, because the dry paint and the wet paint can be very different depending what the pigments are made out of. So I would use that as your reference and start from there when you are planning out any artwork that you're doing, or at least not be surprised when your work is dried and it looks a little bit different than it did when it was wet, because, you know, like I said, the colors are going to dry a bit different. So that's just one thing to take into consideration. So another thing I wanted to go over, I know we went over the jelly gouache and we went over the designer gouache tubes that I was using, and there is an acrylic gouache that you can get, which is a little bit different. It's more of a acrylic pigment but used like a gouache. So the difference with that is the designer gouache you can reactivate with water like these ones, and the acrylic gouache is a more permanent. So once the acrylic gouache dries, you can't reactivate it. So there's pros and cons of that depending on how you're doing your artwork. If you just want to put down certain layers and be able to go over it again and not disturb the underlayers, the acrylic gouache might be good. But if you want to be able to maybe reactivate the color or fix it up, maybe even water it down and kind of lift it or erase it, the designer gouache is good for that because you can still manipulate it even once it's dry. So just keep that in mind, depending on the kind of art that you want to make, whether the permanent acrylic gouache is better for you or the designer gouache that you can reactivate. In most cases, people are going to be using the designer gouache like these, and they're ones that you can, like I said, I can go back in right now and I can reactivate this one that I laid down earlier that was already dry. And sometimes you can get nice effects through that, and that's something that you intentionally want to do. But if you were using the acrylic wash, I couldn't go back over and do that because once it was dry, it's dry and it's there permanently and you can't manipulate it anymore. So just something to think about again when you're buying your materials. Think about the end use and what ways are going to work best for the way that you're doing your art. Okay, I also wanted to show you a nice way to finish off your gouache drawings, and that's using pencil crayons on top. So you can see you can add some nice shading in places. I know this is purple. I didn't have a pink that looked the same, but you can see how I'll do it on the different colors. But you can add some nice like shading details. Now on paper like this, this is a cold pressed watercolor paper, so it's very textured. When you're using the pencil crayon, you are going to see that. If you are using pencil crayon, actually the more opaque your colors are, the less you're going to see. Actually, you can still see that through. If you have really thick layers on top, then you might not see the texture as much, but it is something that it's nice. You can add like details with on top of your colors if you want to add some nice like sharp details that you wouldn't be able to get these kind of lines with your brush, but you can add it with a pencil crayon. You can see how easy it is to add some nice detail over top of your colors once you're done. And you know, it's just fun to try different combinations to see how if you're someone that likes to use details in your paintings, then this is a great way to get the overall colors down with your gouache, and then go over with colored pencil crayons to add some more layers, details, whatever you want with it. But it's just a really nice addition to use with the gouache, and I like to do that as well. And then again, like I showed you in the one, you can also go over it with Microns, any kind of fine liners, any kind of acrylic gel pens, anything like that, and add your details on top. It's a great way to, I don't know, just enhance your paintings and drawings and have some fun with it. I think I have covered most of the tips, just some basic tips for using gouache that I have learned over the last couple months, and I really love using it. I'm going to continue to use it and hope to do some maybe more tutorials down the road of actual maybe paintings that I do, and I can take you along and show you how I do it. I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional, I'm just learning as I go, but I thought I would let you guys know what I have found out so that maybe you can start off a little easier knowing how this medium is going to work for you and the benefits of it and how to use it. But anyways, I highly recommend gouache. Those are my tips for you. All right, I hope you found that helpful and you enjoyed the video. And if you got any good tips that you want to share with other people, then please leave them in the comments. And maybe there's something that I missed, that there's something that you really love about gouache, or maybe there's something that you really hate about gouache. I'd love to know in the comments. Just, yeah, let me know your experience with using this paint as well. And we can share it with everyone and hope that everyone gets to try it, because it's a really fun medium and you can really make some beautiful artwork with it. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we will see you next time, and keep creating and keep dreaming. Take care. Bye. So if you've been thinking about using gouache paint, I got some